Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I am here today with Lawrence Anton and I'm going to grill him on his views. So yeah, over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Helen, obviously. So as Helen said, I'm Lawrence and I run a YouTube channel on antinatalism, and I'm not really sure there's much more to... Well, depending on when this goes out, we will have either had a conference recently or it'll be in a few days if Helen releases this straight away. So that's the Antinatalist Advocacy Conference 2025. So that's like the main thing I've been working on at the moment. But apart from that, yeah, just run the channel.
Okay, cool. Okay, so firstly, how long have you been vegan and how long have you been antinatalist?
Vegan since the 1st of October 2017, so that's just over 8 years now. And then antinatalist around the same sort of time, but probably more like 7.5 years, something like that, because it was a few months later. But both around vaguely the same time.
Right, so you've been vegan a few months longer than
Yes,
antinatalist.
I was vegan
Right,
before I was antinatalist, yeah.
That's cool. So curious, was it vegans that made you decide to go antinatalist? What, is that the right way of wording it? Was it other vegans that inspired you and made you realise?
Yes, but I don't think necessarily because of veganism. I first heard the term at a vegan outreach event. I heard someone mention it. I wasn't in that conversation, but I heard the term. And then later in Leicester Square AV, or Anonymous for the Voiceless Cube, which we would have both done, way back in the day when George Martin was organising it with Brad Simmons. And then afterwards we went to Mod Pizza, which no longer exists. And I was talking to Brad... Michael Green, if you remember him, who's no longer with us, sadly, and also George, and antinatalism came up, and then I had like a long conversation with them, and obviously they're all vegan, but it obviously came up because the environment was a vegan environment, and so people like to explore ideas and stuff like that, and there are a lot of antinatalist vegans. But when they were presenting antinatalism, I don't remember them presenting it as related to veganism. It was just presenting it in itself.
That's interesting, because those people you mentioned, George, Brad and Michael Green, I remember that they've all been like open about being antinatalist.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's cool. So was it what was it? Go back a bit. What made you go vegan in the first place?
Well, I was in Sweden at the time, and that was also where I heard the term antinatalism at the outreach event. And I'd moved there for an exchange program through my degree, and I moved into this flat with there was like 12, 14 other people. It was a big flat, and there was one girl there who I'm still friends with today, and she had a dog. Unfortunately, really sadly, the dog has now passed away a couple of years ago, or maybe a year ago. And yeah, she had this dog, and I was living, with them, and I just got to know this dog over time. I'd never really interacted with animals in any significant way before, and then just over the course of getting to know this dog, and then I just sort of had this cognitive dissonance of eating meat and basically being friends with this dog. And that made me change.
That's interesting. It was actually a dog that made you go vegan. I didn't know that, because people say,
Sorry to interrupt. That was the thing that spurred me initially, and then obviously once I had that idea of like, oh, this feels like really wrong. I think that was the emotional moment I became vegan. But then once I to actually absorb the ideas, I then obviously watched like the classic stuff like Gary Yourofsky's speech, Earthlings, also. I forget the name of the guy that did it, but 101 Reasons to Go Vegan.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I forget the guy's name, but yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's a really good video though. I don't know his name either, but yeah, I remember watching that on a train before on loud, so people around could hear. Yeah, because it's like really, really good reasons. Like loads of really good reasons to go vegan. So So that's cool that it was a dog that made you start thinking. So when you first thought about antinatalism, that was when you were talking to Michael, Brad, and George. What were they? What was their message? It wasn't about veganism, but what sort of things did they say?
It was a long time ago now, so I can't remember all the details of the conversation. So they might have related it to veganism in some way, but that's not the fragments of memory I have. I don't remember them strongly relating it to veganism. But yeah, no, they basically just explained why they were antinatalists. So they would, talk about things like David Benatar's asymmetry, which I don't know, maybe we'll get into if you want to. It's completely up to you. Spoke about like the harms in life, the risks in life, and the fact that there's not some sort of ghost fetus out there that wants to be created. We just create them and then they exist. And obviously then they want to continue existing, but there was no particular reason to need to create them in the first place. And then they are exposed to all this stuff. I just found it like very interesting. I did find it compelling after that conversation because I'd given them a bit of pushback and asked questions, just like in a curious way, not to berate them or anything. I can't particularly remember what the pushback was I gave them, but I'm sure it was pretty like standard stuff. And then they sent me away with some links to go and listen to David Benatar interviews. So they would have probably been, I think it would have been, he had an interview with Sam Harris. And there was
Remind me who Sam Harris is?
So Sam Harris, he's I think originally he was a neuroscientist, but now he's sort of a social political commentator, podcaster, also sort of into sort of secular spirituality, like mindfulness, meditation, stuff like that. That's mostly what he does now, as far as I'm aware. But he's just like generally quite intelligent American guy. So that was it.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So, what was the? Do you remember any of the pushbacks you had about antinatalism back then?
Not particularly, but I can guess what they would have been. So I think it probably would have been maybe I don't know if it's even right to call it pushback, but it was more just like asking questions to understand the point of view more. So it would have been stuff like, oh, but what about the good aspects of life? And, how extreme does this go? What if, you just stub your toe once in your life, which obviously is no one has a life that good. And stuff like that. I can't remember the particulars, but it would be the typical stuff that I now hear from people about antinatalism. But I can't remember like massive specifics.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, I was going to say, stubbing your toe is nothing. Last night I cut my thumb on a tin I was washing up. It wouldn't stop bleeding for ages. Oh my God. And that was because I was in a rush. And that's about life. I was thinking, life, things always happen. Things always happen. So it's always like reason to rush or stress or whatever. And one thing after another. Because then I was running for a train. And I only just got it and stress. So these things do make me think, God, life is just a big risk. So what about what you mentioned briefly? What about the good things? Life has amazing moments, so isn't it worth it? Don't you think? Is it worth like being brought into existence to experience those moments of joy that make it all worth it?
Yeah. So I think obviously once we're here, those are good things, right? And I think those can make continuing existing worth it. And obviously, now we exist, we have an interest in pursuing these things, and that's completely understandable. And I want people to pursue those things and have as good a life as possible. But I don't see those as a reason to bring someone into the world, because those things are only good because we have an interest in experiencing them. And so before someone comes into existence, there's no one to want those things. So to put it another way, you go back 100 years, you didn't exist, no one watching this existed. We didn't care that we were missing those things, right? It wasn't like a deprivation or some sort of hole in our being. There was no us to miss that. And so given that it isn't bad if we don't have those things, I don't think it's better for us to have them once we're here. Compared to never coming into existence, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I think I get what you mean. So you're saying, like, overall, it's not worth the hassle of being born and existing.
Yeah, well, that's the next bit. So one aspect is that the good things in life are not a reason to create life. But that doesn't give you a reason not to create life. The bit that gives you a reason not to create life is the fact that there are bad things in life. So, cancer, all sorts of diseases, loneliness, bereavement, etc., cutting your hand while you're washing up. All of these sorts of things, those are a reason not to create someone. And this is where David Benatar's asymmetry comes in. There's sort of like there's an asymmetry in how we value goods and bad things in life with respect to the question of bringing someone into the world. And it's a fairly common intuitive view that people tend to have, but it's not one that people always recognize the antinatalist conclusion that at least I and obviously Benatar would think that results from it. So, for example, if you have a couple, if they had a child and they were guaranteed that child was going to have an amazing life. Obviously, if they had the child, it would be great that child has an amazing life, but it's not. Oh, sorry, my alarm. Yeah, it's great that if the child is brought into the world, that child is going to have a great life, obviously. But that's not a reason to create the child, right? Because if they never existed, it wouldn't matter that they didn't have that amazing life. It wouldn't be a deprivation. It may be like a permission to create the child, but it's not a reason to create the child. Whereas if you look at the flip side, you have parents who are similarly sure that if they create a child, that child is going to have an awful life. Like, I don't know, a kid born into a war zone who gets blown up, after like being 5 months of being alive. This is like a horrific thing that no one would wish on a child. Even though that child doesn't exist, and so someone could say, well, if we were to be symmetrical about this, there's no child to have an interest in not being blown up. But if we actually think about how we care about these things and the values we have, there does seem to be this asymmetry here in that the absence of a good thing, if the reason there's an absence is that there's no person, that's completely fine, right? But if there's an absence of a bad thing, like the child being blown up, that's actually better than the child being blown up, right? And so that's a reason not to create the child. If a family know that bringing a child into the world is going to mean that child is going to suffer unspeakably, that's a reason not to create them, rather than just being like neutral on the matter. Whereas with the good life, I think there's reason for neutrality.
Okay, that's interesting. The only thing that's coming to mind that makes me sort of see what you're saying is that I realised it's quite interesting in the last couple of years, possibly from watching your videos, partly, I'm not sure, but that it's more important to avoid suffering, to seek joy. And I never thought of that till like a couple of years ago, but it's so true when you think about it. So yeah, there is that. But I don't quite get it, because isn't it a good thing to like bring someone into the world if you know they're going to have an amazing life? Like the same way it's a good thing to book a holiday if you know you're going to have an amazing time on that holiday. See what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think the difference there is that, for someone to book a holiday, they obviously have to exist, right? And if you exist, you already have those pre-established interests in wanting, you may not have a specific interest in booking a holiday, it would depend who you are, but you have a general interest in wanting to experience nice things, maybe experience new things, have rest, all of these sorts of things, and a holiday can provide that, like many other things can provide that. So there are actual tangible interests that people have that make pursuing that thing make complete sense. Whereas when it comes to a child who isn't born, there are no pre-established interests to make sense to me anyway, to create them so that they can experience those things. So to give another example, so me and you, right, we're already alive. At some point, we're going to want to retire. And it's obviously a good thing if we could have a nice retirement, right? But if I were to create a child and say, well, I had that child so they can have a nice retirement, that makes no sense because they didn't exist to want the retirement in the first place, if that makes sense. But on the flip side, and again, this is where the asymmetry comes in, it does make sense to say, I didn't create that child, because I know that they're going to suffer, right? Like being blown up in a war zone.
Yeah.
That's where the asymmetry comes in. So you can appeal to events that would happen in the child's life as a reason not to create them, but appealing to them as a reason to create them makes less sense to me. And that's where the asymmetry comes in.
Right, okay, yeah, I sort of see. But I'm thinking, well, like, most parents and children obviously like have a lot in common because of genes and because of like life experiences and how they're brought up from like generations and where they live and da. So I think that, like, for example, my mum could see that like what she's enjoyed in life, like her by having children will probably enjoy the same sorts of things in life. Like, yeah, like holidays, like sunny weather, like rest, like loads of things. Retirement, well, that's a small example. But so I think, like, going on my mum having me, I think that, like, that's a reason to have kids because like you can think, oh yeah, I enjoy life because I'm lucky, I'm privileged, live in England, and come from like I'm like middle class, not like going to end up on the street or whatever. So if I have a child, then they will probably enjoy their life too. Do you know what I mean? So I think that that's an argument for having kids, because if you're lucky and privileged and find lots of joy in life, then if you have biological kids, then and they have a lot of your genes, then they probably will as well. You see what I mean? Does that make sense? So I don't quite see the asymmetry, although, like I said, it is more important to avoid suffering. There is sort of like, I guess that's an interest before a child's conceived. You can think like there is an interest for them to exist and enjoy life. Am I making sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, maybe instead of, if the asymmetry isn't kind of resonating with you, maybe I can touch on a few like other arguments that antinatalists use. So maybe someone like yourself could say, the good things in life do seem like a reason to create someone. In my view, there's still a reason not to create a child. And one of those reasons is that if you do create someone, there's this risk that they might have an awful life, right? So, you're saying, if I'm like relatively affluent, middle class, and, I feel like I can provide my child with a stable environment with ample resources and stuff like this. I don't need to list the examples of people that have been brought up in those circumstances and actually had horrible lives, right? Even people who are brought up in much better circumstances. We can all think of like celebrities who have access to all of the resources you could ever want, more resources than anyone in history. And yet they're depressed or they're plagued by other problems, right? They have family issues or they lose someone they love or things like this. And there are many famous people that we all know and love, right, that we can connect to through film or through whatever, who have committed suicide because it was unbearable for them, right? So these are people who arguably have access to the best standard of living that the world has ever seen. And yet even they can lead awful lives to the point where they actually choose to end it prematurely, right? And so given this is a risk and that not creating someone is in no way a problem, it's not like if you don't create someone, they're out there in the ether lamenting the fact they were never born, right? They just simply don't exist like 100 years ago, me and you just didn't care. Why would you take that risk is another argument. It seems completely indecent to create someone and roll the dice for them on their welfare when you don't have to live with the consequences. To an extent you do, obviously, because if you're their parent, you're being involved in their life. But in terms of actually experiencing the things that happen to them, it's only them that has to live with the consequences. And to me, that just seems like a gamble that should not be down to one person to make for someone else, given that the alternative is completely unproblematic, which is not create them in the first place, or they never come into existence. So that's another reason I think not to create someone that maybe is easier to understand, because I recognize that the asymmetry, even though I think it is grounded in views that people do actually generally have day to day, when you explain it, it can come across as very like academic and philosophical, and so it's often hard to understand. And it took me a while to understand it as well. So yeah, maybe the sort of that perspective of risk is maybe more understandable for people.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, explained it well. So I like you, I know a lot of vegans, and some of them have kids, some of them have adopted kids, some of them think that it's best for like you, best for everyone to not have kids, and some of them. Some of them want to have kids and think that it's a good idea for vegans to have kids. So there's very different views amongst vegans. Do you think that, well, I think I know what you're going to say, but do you think it makes sense for, I know you said it makes sense for people in general to not have kids. Do you think it makes sense for vegans to not have kids, or for vegans to not want anyone to have kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I say, in general, I think it's best for people not to create children. So that would go for vegans as well. I can definitely see why vegans would be more motivated to instill their values into a new generation. Obviously, you don't have to create a child to do that. You can adopt, like you say, or you can just pass on values to the next generation in ways that don't involve raising a child, right? You know, there are teachers out there or influencers or all these sorts of people. And actually, that's maybe a much more effective use of time, given that it takes, well, depending on how you see raising a child, some people say it takes 18 years to raise a child. Some people say it's a lifetime commitment. I think it's a lifetime commitment. But either way, it takes a significant amount of time and resources to raise just one child. And you're not even guaranteed that you actually are going to pass on your values to them. So if you're concerned about raising the next generation of vegans or animal rights activists or whatever, it seems much more effective to me to focus on spreading your values more generally, which and part of that will naturally go to the next generation, or you can focus on trying to communicate your values to children or younger people. But to have that motivation of passing, animal inclusive values onto the next generation, creating a child just doesn't seem like at all an effective way to do that. It seems more like a bit of a rationalization that someone probably wanted a child and they're coming up with reasons to justify that. I also think there are other considerations as well. So if you focus your time and effort on trying to spread animal-friendly or generally suffering-focused values in society, it seems like there is... If you were to want to raise a child as a way of doing that, there's this potential backfire, right? In that they might end up not being vegan, right? So you've essentially just created someone who is effectively a serial killer, right? They're not intending to be a serial killer, but they are, in practice, killing, over the course of their life, thousands of innocent beings. And that's obviously not something you intended, but that's something that happened, and that does happen to vegans. There isn't really an equivalent potential backfire if you're just trying to spread your values more generally. If you create a child, that's a new person who didn't have to exist. So if they end up being non-vegan, you've just created a non-vegan out of nothing, right? Whereas if you focus on people who already exist or will exist, regardless of your actions, like other people's children, well, those people are already going to exist. So if you don't end up convincing them to be vegan, they were going to be non-vegan anyway. So there's less potential for a backfire in that you're just needlessly creating new people to kill animals, basically, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely. And I thought the same as well, actually. The amount of time it just takes to look after a baby. That's just when they're a baby, the first year. The amount of things you have to do for a baby and the amount of sacrifices you have to make, sleep and everything. And then you have obviously have to save all your energy for looking after the baby. That's just 1 year, and then after that, it's still so much time just looking after a child, taking them to school and wherever else, and making sure there's always someone to look after them, and always watching them, making sure they're okay, and buying clothes for them. Everything it's so much time, and that's it takes over your life, and that could be time spent doing a YouTube channel about veganism, or making the world a more peaceful place in so many ways. So yeah, it is a real time commitment having kids, and yeah, I thought that might not be like the most the best way to utilise our time on this planet.
So I was just going to add another aspect of it is I don't want. So if there's like a vegan who's not convinced who's watching this, I don't want to come across as not recognizing that creating a child could have a benefit to like an animal rights movement, right, or spreading vegan values. Now, obviously, I don't think that's a good reason to create the child, right, because of all the negatives. But I recognize that in the world we exist in, there's an animal advocacy movement, right, that's trying to create a better world for animals. And there are all sorts of aspects of why or how that movement makes progress, right? So we change laws, there's new technologies developed, we convince people. And part of that, part of the change we're creating will be creating new children who will eventually go on to be vegans. Like I said, not all of them will be, and that's a reason not to create them. But part of the progress our movement can make will be like vegans creating children, right? So I don't want to come across as being like ideologically opposed to like any recognition that there can be a positive for the vegan movement. Again, I don't think that's a reason to create the child, or that's a good enough reason to create the child. But I don't want to come across as being blind to that. My message more is that is an element of, or can be an element of, making the world better for animals. But if we remove that element, we don't lose the animal rights movement. Look at all the progress we've made in the past few decades or past 50, 100 years, right? There's been a lot of progress in a lot of different ways. I would say an insignificant amount of that has been because of procreation. Most of the vegans in the world today that are actually creating change weren't born of vegan parents, right? And so we have this amazing capacity already to make the world better for animals, and we already have been doing that. It's an uphill battle, obviously, but we have been making a lot of positive things happen without this element of procreation being a significant force. Now, I recognize it will become a more significant force as there are more vegans, right? So more vegans will naturally have children. But what I'm saying is, given we've made so much progress already, still loads more to go, but given we've made so much progress already without this element really of procreation being a significant force, it shows there is already this capacity for movement building and making progress for animals. So we don't necessarily need this additional benefit of creating children for veganism, right? And given the negatives to the children, but also potential backfire effects and the opportunity costs, right, of the time and money, I'm just not sure it's worth it, even from the perspective of someone who's not really an antinatalist, if that makes sense. In the same way I'm an antinatalist.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So someone who just wants to make the world go vegan as quickly as possible, it wouldn't necessarily make sense for them to have a child for that reason. Yeah. Do you think there's any other links that haven't been mentioned between antinatalism and veganism?
Yeah, well, so one of the most obvious sort of intersections between antinatalism and veganism on a more like moral or conceptual level is, I'm sure you've heard this and other vegans have heard this, when you get this particularly from farmers, that if we didn't breed these animals, they wouldn't be here, right? And, you know, at least we're giving them a life, right? Obviously, and they say that as a positive, right? As in, you know, the practices we do, at least the humane, right, farms, those are actually good things because we're giving the animals a life, right? Even if we sort of, you know, kill them painlessly at the end of the life, which obviously is all bullshit anyway. But this is presented as like coming into existence is a good thing, so we're benefiting these animals. Well, obviously that is in stark opposition to what antinatalism says. Antinatalism actually says, well, no, we actually don't benefit these animals by bringing them into existence. That is actually one of the harms that we impose on them. Then we kill them and exploit them in other ways or whatever. So that's actually one of the like the strongest intersections between antinatalism and veganism, in that veganism primarily is a movement to end the human exploitation of animals, right? Obviously there's discussions about wild animal suffering. I don't really see those as vegan discussions. They're more just like, discussions around animal ethics. Veganism, in my understanding, is more focused on the human core, the
anthropological.
Yeah, there's a term for like it being sourced, but the human sourced or the human inflicted harms on animals. But I know people conceive of veganism in different ways. But like most of the animals, or many of the animals that humans actually inflict harm on, we breed into existence, and so in that way, veganism is kind of in a big way like an anti-breeding movement. It's just don't breed animals into existence, right? So in that way, there is a big alignment with antinatalism, and that's one of the reasons that, in my view, I don't think there's a logical, bulletproof link between antinatalism and veganism. I don't think if you're an antinatalist, you have to be vegan in all circumstances, and I don't think if you're a vegan, you have to be antinatalist in all circumstances, given the values of those two things. But I think there are a lot of strong links, right? And I've already gone over the links between like veganism to antinatalism, so maybe it's worth covering antinatalism to veganism for a minute. So the main thing is kind of what I've just said, in that if you're an antinatalist, you view it as wrong to bring, I would say, sentient beings into the world, right? There are some antinatalists who say just human beings, but then I would say to them, why is it wrong to bring human beings into existence, right? Normally, that is because there are harms that human being will experience. Well, there are also harms that animals will experience, and actually they experience much more harms. The average life of an animal is way worse than the average life of a human. And so even if someone is an antinatalist only when it comes to humans, I actually think if they really reflect on the values that have led them to that conclusion, it should also lead them to the conclusion that they should be an antinatalist when it comes to animals. And if you don't want to bring beings into the world by procreating, we also shouldn't bring beings into the world by paying someone else to breed beings into the world, right? Which we do by paying for animal products like meat, dairy, and eggs. So I think there is a strong argument for antinatalists to, in practice, be vegan. There are ways, and I've done a video on this before, there are ways an antinatalist could get around this. So an antinatalist could say, well, I hunt, right? So you don't bring those animals into existence. They were already in existence. You just go out and kill them. Obviously, I think there are independent arguments to say don't kill those animals, or that it's wrong to be doing that. But that is a way that an antinatalist could get around it. But 99% of antinatalists are not going to be going out and hunting animals, right? So in practice, antinatalists, I think, have a strong reason to go vegan to be consistent with their own antinatalist values, by not paying for animals to be brought into existence for meat, dairy, eggs, stuff like that. And then I think they should reflect on the other independent arguments for not those other marginal sort of cases. But yeah, so I thought that was worth covering.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really glad you said that, actually. In fact, I was going to mention it, and you reminded me, because it's interesting. I've thought it so many times in my 10 years now being vegan. So often I see it more like on social media in comments. People say, like, when a vegan, say, puts a post up about a farm, about a slaughterhouse, about the industry, someone will comment usually saying, oh, at least they were born, about the animals. And I'm thinking that's nuts, because I've never heard someone say that about a human. I've never heard, like, when you hear in the news an awful story about parents abusing a child, you never hear anyone say, "Oh, at least they were born. At least they brought them into existence." So I really feel like giving these people a shake when they say "Oh, about the animals. Oh, at least they were born." So it's like a way of justifying themselves not being vegan. Yeah. At least they were born. So they think it's a good thing that these animals, that even if they weren't on a factory farm, they were bred to live a short time and then murdered. And I've said before, if a human couple had a baby and then gave them a good life, then when they got to 20 years old, killed them, you would not be saying, at least they were born, you'd be saying they should be put in prison and the key should be thrown away so they can't do it again. So it's really interesting, isn't it, how there's this this double standard when it comes to humans and animals. So yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And like you said, animals usually suffer so much more because they mostly are on a factory farm or equivalent, so they have a horrible life. And yeah, like we said, suffering is more important to avoid than joy is to seek. So yeah, thank you. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to touch on. Oh yeah, you mentioned wild animals. That reminded me of... I think you mentioned wild animals briefly, but some vegans say, when I mentioned before, some vegans think that vegans should be having children. One argument I've heard for that is in the future, there's still going to be wild animals and we should be looking after them. So, like in hundreds of years' time, say, if we stop having kids, then who's going to look after all the wild animals? Whereas if we carry on, we could start looking after wild animals more and making their lives less full of suffering, I guess, and make them safer. So is that a reason, you think, for vegans to have children and raise them vegan, so that in the future there are still vegans and they can look out for wild animals?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I think to say on this. So there are a few, I think, sort of more conceptual sort of moral things, and then there's some practical things. So to start with the more conceptual moral things. So this sort of argument is kind of it's like a utilitarian argument, right? So you've kind of got to approach it in that way, and I think if someone has the sort of values where they're willing to impose significant amounts of suffering on people because of some potential benefit to others, then you've kind of got to just wrangle them away from those values in general, rather than just on this specific question, right? So let me say the same thing in a different way that I think might be clearer. So if someone is willing to create a child and impose the significant amount of harm that's going to happen to that child over the course of their life, because everyone's life contains a significant amount of harm, and you've, like I said before, you've got that risk that they might lead a completely unbearable life for the benefit of wild animals, or some wild animals. This person has got to be consistent, right? So would they inflict similar harms on an existing person? Like if we somehow found out that torturing existing people for a period of time that would lead to equivalent harms as bringing someone into the world, and that would benefit wild animals somehow. Well, people have then got to make a call on whether they would support that or not. I wouldn't support that. I think it is important to think about wild animals and the lives they lead and try and benefit them. But I think it's extraordinarily naive to start imposing significant harms on people directly now for a potential benefit to wild animals that we're not entirely clear would necessarily happen. There might be good reasons to think that there would be a benefit, but we can't guarantee it, right? But we can guarantee the harm that is going to happen to those people if we torture them or if we create them, right? And so to be imposing these extraordinary harms on people intentionally and directly for these more speculative benefits to wild animals that may, they may be benefiting wild animals, but there is some speculation. It's not guaranteed. That's just something people have got to make a judgment call on. It's not. I don't think that's just an antinatalist question. That's just that's a more deeper question for people's values. And if they support it, then maybe they're gonna sacrifice their antinatalist values for that. If they don't support that sort of thing, then they're not going to sacrifice their antinatalist values for that. But I think we have to be very careful with stuff like this. You know, if we were to find out that, you know, I could go, there's some village of 100 people, right? And I could go in and execute all of those people. And it has a potential for, you know, bringing 1 million people out of poverty. Okay, you could roll that dice, but, you know, that's kind of, people have got to make a call on whether they'd support something like that or not. And for me, I wouldn't support stuff like that. I realize that running risks and imposing on people's lives and imposing harm on people in some circumstances can have a benefit for others. And this is a question about that, like creating a child to benefit wild animals. I recognize that is something that could happen. It could benefit wild animals to create a child. And when I was first introduced to this sort of question, I was a bit confused about it. And I was, you know, I was thinking, oh, well, you know, maybe does that justify creating a child? But when I reflected on it more and thought about actually the implications of that, it seems like a judgment call that I wouldn't support. I just think imposing those sorts of harms on someone for more speculative benefits, I'm not sure that is something that I would support. I think we need to be very cautious about imposing significant harms like that on people. Because look at all of the totalitarian regimes that thought they were doing good by putting people in gulags and stuff like that because they wanted to benefit others or bring about the utopia. This sort of logic, whilst in the abstract and in your mind, you can run the calculus and think, yeah, this is maybe worth it. In practice, this leads to dark shit, this sort of logic. So I'm not sure we should really be pursuing it. The more practical stuff has completely gone from my mind now. There was some other things I was going to say. Maybe I'll remember it in a bit and we can come back to it. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I see what you're.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say was this wasn't the practical thing, but it was again a more sort of conceptual moral thing. That sort of calculus, I also think would potentially result in other things that those people that accept that type of trade-off would have to make, which would I think be quite worrying to especially vegans. So I think it's worth noting. So if someone would be willing to do something like create a child because it would potentially have a benefit for wild animals, like, you know, this child would be consuming a lot of resources, so it would mean that there's land being used by humans that wouldn't then have wild animals on it. First of all, obviously, you've got to debate whether that's actually empirically true, and that's a debate to be had. But let's just take it for granted for now. That would also, one form of human use of land is farming, right? So would that not be an argument for free-range farms, you know? If you had a free-range farm with a few cows grazing on it, you know, this land could have been a tropical rainforest, like in the Amazon. You know, a lot of the Amazon is being mowed down to raise animals on. And someone might think, look, it's good there's not rainforest there because wild animals will be suffering on that land. And I'm sympathetic to that view. I'm sympathetic to the view that it's better that there is a piece of land with no sentient beings on it who aren't suffering, you know. But I don't think that's necessarily an argument for putting cows on that land and killing those cows. And I also don't think that's an argument for, you know, creating humans to clear that land and then those humans leading a life that's going to have a lot of suffering in and eventually dying as well. I think we need to approach this question of wild animal suffering is a real and significant thing. And one of the things we can do there are many things we can do to mitigate that wild animal suffering. One of them is trying to reduce the amount of land in an ethical way. I don't think we should be going around and fucking killing wild animals to get them off land, but there may be ways that we can reduce the surface area that wild animals are sort of existing on. This is all obviously very speculative, but I think we should be pursuing those more ethical ways of helping wild animals, and not throwing humans into a meat grinder of reality, or animals into a meat grinder of reality, right? Like, I don't think we should be creating free-range farms to help wild animals and throwing the domesticated animals into a meat grinder. So I think people need to be careful with that logic, because if you're going to use it to counter antinatalism, it could actually backfire and counter veganism as well. And there are actually individuals that I know of that aren't vegan because of this question. So it does go both ways.
Why is it they're not vegan? Because they think that it's a waste of land?
Because they think that if you clear wild land with wild animals on and put a free-range farm there, there's going to be less suffering overall. Because there are only a few animals on that free-range farm, but there would be many more wild animals. And so they think, yeah, well, I'm not going to be vegan because if I pay for free-range meat, I'm funding the removal of wild animals from that land, which overall is a good thing, if that makes sense.
I see, yeah. So they're the ones that buy free range rather than they make sure it's free range, the animal products they buy. I see, yeah. Okay, that's a shame. Yeah, then they're forgetting the bit about the slaughterhouse and the, Yeah,
so I just remembered the practical thing about for wild animals. So I think in practice, so this is a point that some more pro-natalist vegans raise, right? The point that you just raised. But I think in practice, it's really like it's really kind of a non-point. Just because, so for example, so let's say you're doing vegan outreach, right? And someone comes up to you and says, well, if we go vegan overnight, animals will just run across the planet, it'll be chaos, all of this sort of stuff, which would be true. But in practice, that is not going to happen, right? We would love it to be vegan overnight, even though there would be problems, but that's just not going to happen, right? This is going to be a more gradual process. And I kind of see this concern about vegans not having children, so humans are going to go extinct and then wild animals will, run across the earth and all be suffering. I kind of see it as the same sort of argument as what if everyone goes vegan overnight and animals just take over the world? Like, yes, in practice, if that happened, it would cause issues, but in practice, it is not going to happen. Like, there are going to be many people who still have children, and the human race will continue. And yeah, this is not going to be an issue in practice, I don't think. I think in practice, people are going to continue having kids, whether or not you or I have children, or people watching this video have children, or vegans in general have children. The human species will continue, and if we focus our time on effort spreading the values that we want to see in the world, through education and things like that, or developing new technologies, then we can guide the future of humanity towards a vision that is going to be more inclusive and friendly towards animals. Because there will be a future for humanity. If there isn't a future for humanity, antinatalism are going to have nothing to do with it. We're going to nuke ourselves or something like that. So I think in practice, this is just really a non-issue. I just, practically speaking, like a potential hypothetical that is never going to come around, I'm not sure is a really significant counter argument to a position like antinatalism. Just like with veganism, we shouldn't go vegan because if we go vegan overnight, animals are going to run over the world, or blah, blah, blah. Or what if we could have animals that live amazing lives and they don't care that they get slaughtered and stuff like this? It's like, okay, if we lived in that world, maybe we could have that conversation, but we do not live in that world, right? This is just, practically speaking, a non-point.
Yeah, see what you mean. Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. It's that thing about, again, it's just like it's not worth the time it takes to raise a child when there's going to be future generations we can inspire and influence instead and educate. Yeah, I know what you're going to say to this, I think, because you covered it a bit, but are you personally glad that you were born? You're probably going to say, yeah, you are now.
No, I'm going to say that I'm not. No. So Yeah, I think there's two ways to approach this question. So the first is, are you glad to be born on an like what so there's a difference between saying, are you glad to be born, and are you sort of content generally with how your life is, right? So I'm not glad to be born. I don't think it was a good thing that I came into existence. I think it would be better for me if I never came into existence. So in that way, I'm not glad to be born, right? For the reasons I've spoken about before. I think it would be better for me not to come into existence because I've been spared all of the bad things that have been happening to me, but I wouldn't exist to care that the good things wouldn't have come about, right? So I'm not glad I was born. Wait, am I Englishing right?
I think so.
Yeah, I'm not glad to have been born, but it's a separate question to ask: am I sort of generally happy and content with my life as I am now? And to that question, I would say, yeah, I generally have a good life. I have a roof over my head. I have food. I have, clean tap water. I have access to modern medicine, all of these sorts of things. Like, if you look at the sweep of history and all the people that have ever lived and the people that live today, I have one of the best lives, right? And access to the best standard of living. I live in a economically developed country. Supermarkets, hospitals, all of this sort of stuff. So, I have bad things in my life, but in the grand scheme of things, I have a very good life, and I should be aware of that, and not lament too much about the bad things I do have in my life, even though I have significant bad things in my life, like everyone does. I should keep those in perspective, right? Because there are people in the world today and who have lived in the past who have much worse lives than me. And there's animals as well, obviously. So, yeah, despite having bad things in my life, and there have been periods of my life that have been like very bad, in general, I've had a great life, and and I'm generally content with my life. I enjoy the things I do. You can see there's a stack of books there that I have to read for a new podcast I'm working on, and I really enjoy like thinking about those sorts of ideas like pessimism and antinatalism, and having friends like you and the people that Helen and I were at a birthday party last night, and the people at that party, there are super valuable people to have in my life there. And I'm not glad to be born, but that doesn't mean I like lament or hate my life or anything. There are many things in life that I can enjoy. I just recognize that those weren't a reason to bring me into the world, but the bad things were a reason not to bring me into the world, if that makes sense.
I get what you're saying, but I just don't think I can agree. I wonder if one day I will. Yeah,
so
it's interesting.
You're glad to be born?
I am glad to be born, and I think, so like you, there's been some shit times in my life that I could have done without. But I like a lot of life. So I like big things like celebrations and big things, but also small things as well, like just doing this, just sitting, chilling, having a chat, and chilling on my own, not doing very much at all. Yeah, lots of things that I like. So I think that it was worth me coming into existence for my enjoyment. But I do get that it was a massive risk, me being brought into existence, because as you said, I was not a ghost waiting to be born or anything before. And I just think I'm very, very, very lucky. Like an example is in COVID, I was I think one of the luckiest people, because I was not high risk of getting ill from COVID, and I was living in a decent sized place of people I was happy living with, and I was still, unlike most people, going out to work at the time. So I was getting because I was working in a pharmacy, I got to go out and talk to people, even though it was just work. But I thought it was much better than. I was much better off than most people, because I wasn't cooped up in a little flat on my own or with people I couldn't stand, or and I was going to go out a bit, and I wasn't worrying about my health because I wasn't high risk. And that's just one example of a time. It's a bit of a tangent, but it just often pops into my head, COVID times. And it's just one example, because in a lot of ways I think I'm very lucky, because there's so many different things I enjoy in life, and that's more than can be said for some people. A lot of people get bored easily. I don't, because there are so many things I enjoy and only 24 hours in a day, and I think that's not enough. So I would say I do think about this, and I do think it's a massive risk bringing people into existence, because, like you said, you never know. Even if you're lucky yourself, they might not be. They could just be very unfortunate. They could be a victim of a lot of awful things. There could be wars, and that they could even be a victim of, and there could be all sorts of risks. But I think that I was a risk that was a lucky risk. If that makes sense. Yeah, I think I was very lucky.
I'm not going to try and convince you to not be glad to be born, because, I'm glad that you have the sort of life where you feel glad to be born. I would say I come to a different judgment, different conclusion, but yeah, I don't want to go around and try and convince people to be depressed or some shit like that. So I'm glad that you're glad to be born, because it is indicative that you've had a life that is generally good, which I'm glad.
Yeah, and that's so far. God knows what the future holds.
So far, yeah, exactly. The night is young, as they say.
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, I'd be interesting to see inside your head. Because you enjoy life, you said, but you're not glad that you were born. That's interesting. But yeah, I do agree. It is a massive risk, and I think I'm just. There's probably a 1 in 10 chance that I would be as happy as I am now, I think, with life. When I was born, most people probably, I don't know, I've only had experience of being myself, but I think most people wouldn't be as happy about, just being alive. Well, like you said, in the world, a lot of people are suffering in wars and whatnot, but so that's part of it. But even in London, a lot of people are not as fortunate, because little things they do get bored easily. There's not that much they enjoy, etc. So so I think I'm incredibly lucky, but it was, I think it is a risk bringing someone into existence, because I am just incredibly lucky, and you're incredibly lucky as well, and you're not even glad that you were born. So yeah, interesting. Was there anything you wanted to add to anything while I try and think?
I don't think so, other than I would just say if someone's made it this far in the interview, then they're obviously generally interested in these sorts of subjects. So definitely check out the conference that is going to be happening on the 29th and 30th of November. Again, I don't know when you'll release this, but if Helen releases this after that weekend, then the recordings will be available for people to watch, so you can watch it back. And we're going to be exploring antinatalism, and veganism will obviously come up in the conference as well. And yeah, the general focus of the conference is going to be about how can antinatalists approach doing good in the world or reducing suffering, because there will be a lot of antinatalists out there that have a lot of potential for benefiting others, and one of the ways that I think we can do good in the world is by preventing beings from coming into existence in ethical ways. So, for example, donating to charities that will, provide people with contraception or education around contraception. I think there's a lot of antinatalists out there that have the potential for doing that, and may not be realizing that full potential. And I think on average, antinatalists will actually have more potential to do that sort of stuff, because they generally, don't have children, right? So they have more time, generally more money, compared to their equivalent counterpart who would have had a child. And also they probably are more ethically minded people that think about the ethics of things. Given that they've come to this conclusion, they've had to think about the ethics of a very significant act. So I think they're well situated to do good in the world, and that is what we want to explore in the conference. How can an antinatalist approach that question? What good can they do in the world? That sort of stuff. So yeah, if you're interested in that sort of stuff, then definitely come live if you see this before, or watch the recordings.
Cool, thank you. I remembered what I wanted to ask you now. Yeah, that was lucky. I saw a while ago you went to pride with antinatalist signs.
Yes.
And you said that there was some, I can't remember if they were like children or adults, but people with their parents who came and had a look, and you got quite a positive response. Could you tell a bit more about that? Like, I'm curious about the positive response from parents. Were they just interested, or were they did they stop and have long conversations with you? Did they say you had good points? I'd like to know more if you can remember more about that.
Yeah. So you're referring to obviously antinatalism is like a global thing, right? But antinatalists are generally very spread out. But there are geographical locations where there are more concentrated areas of antinatalists. One of those is London, because it's a massive city. So we have a bit of a community in the UK of antinatalists. If you're an antinatalist in the UK, then I'll send you my email. Maybe you can put it in the description.
Cool.
And then you can contact me and I can add you to this community we have. But we have meetups. We've got a Christmas meetup coming up in December. We have them in London. There are occasionally many meetups in other areas of the country. But one thing we did was we went to Pride in London for the past 2 Prides. I wasn't there for this year, but I was there for last year, and that's the one I think you're talking about. And yeah, we went, we held signs. We made sure those signs were had rainbows on and stuff, so people knew that we weren't protesting Pride, that we were supportive, because you do get like Christian groups turning up and, you know, pray the gay away and shit like this. Yeah, so we went along and we had supportive messages. So we would have messages like, you don't have to have biological offspring to have a family. We had a funny one, which is anal and oral are more environmentally friendly, obviously, because you don't impregnate someone with that way. Yeah. But we also had, you know, more explicit antinatalist signs. We also had signs like make love, not babies, you know, like... yeah, and I think, I mean, I could obviously speculate why. I don't know entirely why it was so well received there, but I would say out of any demonstration we've done anywhere, the most positive reception we've had was at Pride. We had, like, over the course of the day, hundreds and hundreds of people. I'm not exaggerating, like hundreds of people coming up to us, giving us a thumbs up, coming to speak to us, taking signs of our signs with a smile on their face, coming and holding the sign and getting a picture with the sign. And yeah, people loved it. I think a lot of people would have seen us and I think maybe wouldn't have fully realised the extent of our message, saying that it's immoral to procreate. But I think they saw us as saying it's okay not to procreate, and you're an equally valuable human being if you don't procreate. And I think obviously there will be a lot of LGBT people who don't have children. Obviously some of them will, but there'll be a lot that don't have children. And I think they probably felt validated from hearing that message. Yeah, and I guess in one way we're highlighting that it's okay to be different, and obviously they are seen as different, right? I mean, everyone is different, but if you're defining procreating as the norm, which it is, then yeah, to not procreate is to be different. And if you're defining being heterosexual as the norm, which again it is, then not being heterosexual is different. And so maybe they saw some alignment there as well. But yeah, there was massive positive reaction. And we also did have some people coming up to us saying they are antinatalist, which was very cool. Yeah, so there were people that also did understand the full extent of our message and agreed with it as well, which was great. I would say throughout the whole day, we were there for hours and hours and hours. From memory, we got like 2 negative reactions, and even those weren't that bad. Funnily, we did actually get some people initially having a negative reaction because they thought we were a protest group and then realized that we weren't, and then realized what we were saying, and actually it became positive. So that was quite cool as well. But yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and it makes sense. Yeah, I'm really glad that you did that, because yeah, it would have, like you said, made people feel like validated, like they're
Yeah.
seen in society, because there is a lot of pressure, like from Christians sometimes and from people in general, to keep the human race going. But yeah, like you said, obviously a lot of people at Pride, it's harder for them to do that anyway. So yeah, so great. That's brilliant. Yeah, so I might join you next time. Because that would be really cool. And it's amazing that you only had like 2 negative reactions and hundreds of positive ones. Absolutely incredible. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you for having me, Helen.
Yeah, you're welcome.